sharing?
Yeah.
Hello everyone and good evening. I come bearing notes. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's a pleasure to welcome Thomas Thwaites to speak with us. Thomas is a critical designer and researcher whose work explores the social and environmental impacts of science and technology, often by attempting what seems to be completely impossible projects, such as Goatman, the time he took a holiday from being human by becoming a goat in the Swiss Alps, building prosthetics to move and graze alongside a herd. Or from the Toaster project, in which he attempted to make a domestic electric toaster entirely from scratch, starting from raw materials. Over to my glamorous assistant, Rachel.
So his work is held in the permanent collections of major institutions, including the V&A in London, Boymans Museum in Rotterdam, the Banque de France in Paris.
Yeah, very major. Yeah.
They're so major. Asia Culture Center in South Korea. His projects have been exhibited at MoMA, New York, the National Museum of China, Science Museum, Cooper Hewitt Triennale in Milan. He's spoken at TED and is the recipient of numerous awards, including Ars Electronica, and the Ig Nobel as well. Alongside his practice, he currently teaches here on MA Industrial Design, so you guys might know him already. Tonight he'll be sharing more about his process. So.
Cool, thank you. Right. Hello, thank you for that. Yeah, so I teach here at MAID, but since I graduated from my MA, basically I feel like I've been in almost an endless loop of MA projects, just kind of doing stuff that comes along, funded by various people, and sort of things that I'm interested in, for better or worse, and trying to sort of frame this collection of sometimes objects or film or apps or whatever. Yeah, it's difficult to sort of find a through line, and sometimes I say, maybe talk about the success or the failure of a project, but then how do you measure success? Is it number of hits, number of times I've spoken about it? Sometimes I sort of divide them into some are a bit more about storytelling, some are a little bit more about experiment, maybe just a chronological thing, or maybe different themes like climate change or kind of the progression of time, and then maybe A versus B, but then kind of thinking about it today and how I wanted to frame this work for this particular session. I think I'm going to sort of try and talk a little bit about real and unreal. And so, yeah, to start with some very early projects, this is what I would call a real project. It's basically some wallpaper, a little kind of script I wrote which will make wallpaper but in the form of a calendar, and so it's you can get kind of 400 years sort of each day for however big your wall is laid out on the on a wall. And it was just, I did this project because my friend had access to a wallpaper printer, and I just kind of quite often return to this idea of the progression of time, and I'm kind of interested in futures and science fiction and how we kind of got to now, and this kind of little sort of frame that you get to see in your sort of life. And to swap to another project, what I would call maybe an unreal project, a kind of fiction. I had the opportunity to do some work in South Korea with some people who were interested in VR, and I was thinking okay, how will the future view the media that we are kind of creating today? So this is very early media of London, and so I just did that kind of trick of basically made a film which was a documentary about the present, but the fiction was that this had been like reconstructed from media in the being kind of created in the present, but with this like view from the future. And so, you know, you can have kind of fun with that device, you know, the narration gets it wrong and, you know, misinterprets some of the things that we're sort of interested in today. Another kind of quick project, which is in the kind of the Unreal section, which was this kind of fictional sort of startup, which was all about kind of you pay to be manipulated by an algorithm in a way that you feel will be kind of beneficial to you. So let's just all accept that we're constantly being manipulated by an algorithm. So why don't you just kind of decide which way you want to be manipulated? And so this kind of fictional startup was producing these objects that would like kind of subtly manipulate your choices in a way that you wanted. And another kind of project, you know, this is like over the course of like 10 years or so. This was maybe slightly more recent. This was a project which would be in the kind of real category, which is a real attempt to keep some limbs cut from a tree alive in a shipping container by, you know, taking over the like, basically it's like prosthetics for trees. And so this is almost like a heart-lung machine for plants that will kind of feed them sugars that they would normally get from create from photosynthesis, and feed them kind of micronutrients that they would normally get from the roots. And I was working with a biologist at Imperial College, and the idea kind of behind this sort of real attempt was to like, could I grow avocados in a shipping container in London? And it sort of relates to this thought like, well, would it be good to like onshore, you know, the kind of the harms that we offshore? Would it, you know, like, you know, is there a possibility of like self-sufficiency? But it started out as a kind of real project, which then took on this kind of critical aspect. And I'm kind of galloping through. And then this is a project that's still kind of trundling on at the Design Museum down the road, this kind of film where I was asked to make a film about design and sustainability. And, you know, really I kind of think those two things are sort of in opposition, but the film begins with a kind of timeline of the past 20,000 years and talks about the kind of climate crisis and so on, but, you know, I was like, basically just set it up as 9 questions, and the questions are discussed by various people. So one of these episodes is, you know, we have the Chief Sustainability Officer of IKEA talking about like the future plans for IKEA to become sustainable, and then this guy, Tim Smage, who is a neo-peasant, and he believes that we're like destined for collapse, so he's given up his job and has kind of bought a small holding. And so this kind of, you know, where are we going? Like, it's sort of this thing that is constantly kind of I'm returning to in my own work. A recent project, I decided I had to do an app, so I kind of made this app, which was basically a discussion of like anxiety. And again, I think I must have been reading some of the doom, because the app is called Doom Scroll, and it's a kind of discussion of like, are we completely screwed? You know, and how do you like exist in the world if you accept that we are kind of completely screwed in terms of like climate? So this is kind of like a real project, I suppose. But the projects that basically I talk about a lot, and the projects that get brought up in this kind of Thomas Thwaites and so and so and so and so are these projects which are kind of real, like it's me trying to do them, but they are also in the form of this kind of story, and somehow and the story is like the classic. This is like a picture of the classic story arc, like. Basically, for a story, you need a character with a goal who then struggles, right? The kind of hero's journey. The character struggles, and then at the end, they kind of, return home, getting, not necessarily what they set out to get, but what the universe provides them. They might not get what they want, but get what they need. And so these kind of real projects, which kind of take the form of this story, but then I kind of start becoming a fictional character, sort of playing a version of myself, and this is where kind of reality and fiction start to blur a bit. But I think what is kind of important about these projects, and maybe we can, I've got views on like my own work and like which are the good projects and which are the kind of bad projects. But I think in general, the kind of good projects are the ones which have this like real goal, like I really set out to kind of do something. And so the first time this kind of happened to me was when I had this real goal of like, I just want to make something completely myself, starting from the beginning. That's a kind of, I thought, maybe I should do that at least once in my life, just make something from the ground up. And this is my RCA graduation project, and I'm still talking about it. And so, so the object I decided to make was an electric toaster. And then kind of, okay, where do I start? Well, I'll take apart a toaster, and lo and behold, there's like amazing complexity inside this like seemingly simple sort of object. 100 plus different materials, but like, a good basic one is steel, right? So steel is the sort of, civilization is built on steel. There's steel inside this toaster. Very well understood material, should be a kind of fairly straightforward starting point. So I went to go and ask people, like, how do you make steel? Like, there's various kind of experts. This is Professor Cilliers at the Royal School of Mines at Imperial College. He said, look, to make steel, you need to start with iron. So go and get some iron ore. So I phoned up the nearest iron mine I could find to London, arranged to go and visit, went down into the mine with this old guy. Long story short, I was able to get like a suitcase full of iron ore. Okay. Where do you go from here? So I went back to the professor. Professor was busy, he told me to go to the library. I went to the library, like stacks and stacks of information in the library, all about how to turn iron ore into iron or steel, but like all of it is kind of way over my head. And so I ended up going to the History of Science library, where there's this kind of stuff, books on experimental archaeology, but also like kind of original sources. This is a book written in the 15th century, the first book written in the kind of European world about metallurgy and, nice, simple diagrams, information, which is basically what I ended up kind of copying to try and turn my rock into metal. When I started the project, I had all these rules, like I was only going to use like pre-industrial technology, all of these kind of dreams of like, I'm really going to make this toaster. I thought maybe a leaf blower would would be okay because it's sort of like just a version of a bellows, and I, you know, blah, 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 blah. Sort of 15 hours of feeding this kind of furnace, and melted the furnace, you know, really kind of made it like a really big, hot lump of stuff. Then when things had cooled down, kind of scrabbling through the kind of the rubble, and I find this, and I'm like, my God, I've done it. Look at this. Like, it's metallic. It's heavy. It's magnetic. It tastes of metal. I'm like, wow, you know, I really feel this kind of connection to sort of Iron Age humans, and, you know, really starting to wonder why it took quite so long for the Iron Age to come along, because, you know, I did it first time. Then I borrow an anvil, drag it back to my house, like start to try and like work this iron, but each time I heat it and start working it, it shatters. You know, my heart sinks, something's gone wrong. I do a lot more research and realise that those kind of 15th century peasants had a whole kind of apprenticeship, a whole kind of lineage of like understanding like the kind of smells that were coming off their furnaces and the colour of the gases and all of these kinds of almost like tacit knowledge which I just didn't have. And then I realised that if I do this thing again, go and get some more iron ore, build the furnace again, stay up all night, blah, blah, no guarantee that I'd get it right the next time or the next time or the next time, this like kind of chemical reaction. And so I start thinking, oh, I need to be quicker, like, you know, how can I kind of, you know, make this furnace more quickly? How can I like experiment more quickly? And like, okay, well, you know, it's a fire, right? What's a more convenient fire? Like an oven, but like an oven's not going to get up to temperature. What's like a more convenient, like hotter oven? So I start kind of messing around with microwaves, and it turns out if you just like keep going, then you can get a fairly high temperature in a microwave oven. And so this is about 30 minutes at full power, and you can just about get up to the temperature needed to kind of at least continue the reaction that I had started. And after I destroyed a few microwaves, I was sort of getting it just about right so that I could start producing like nuggets of like workable iron. And yeah, long story short, kind of similar thing for like getting various other materials, like travelling to the Highlands of Scotland or kind of underground kind of copper mines, and I was like, plastic, you know, sort of nickel, mica, copper. I got all those materials and I was like, plastic, how am I going to get plastic? Because I was kind of determined that my toaster should have a plastic case. Plastic, as we know, comes from fossil fuels, so I started phoning up fossil fuel companies and trying to like wheedle my way through into like the PR department of BP to try and kind of argue that it would be a fantastic story for BP if they would like fly me to an oil rig and like help me achieve my dream of like, you know, kind of creating this toaster. And they were sort of, I think they almost bought it, but then kind of said, look, we'll phone you back. Never phoned me back. So in the meantime, I start looking at like bioplastics, but I don't know if you've ever tried to use bioplastics, but they're generally a bit crap, at least the ones that I was able to make, so it would kind of crack and dry. And I was like, well, okay, I'm running out of time, and I'm passing all of these like wonderfully pure plastics, just like discarded, on the streets around where I live, and I start kind of thinking, well, I've just got to finish this somehow. And we're living in the Anthropocene now, and so, you know, supposedly, and, you know, we'd like this kind of story of like, you know, people or kind of aliens in the far future, even if like all kind of, you know, nearly all trace of civilization, human civilization was wiped out, there would still be this like marker left in the geology, suddenly this like, you know, sixth great extinction event, the like this disappearance of various fossils. this like layer of like radioactivity would come back, and also the appearance of these like novel kind of long chain polymers would, you know, they'd be sort of sprung up in like ice cores that we're kind of laying down now. So I was like, well, I've been mining all of this ancient kind of iron-bearing rock or kind of so on, blah, 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 blah. Okay, maybe I can just like mine some proto-geology sort of plastic rock. So that's what I decided to do, but before I did that, I went to a plastics recycling factory where they are kind of dealing with the sort of the waste electrical products, and spoke to the CEO about the kind of the WEEE regulation and how that was kind of captured by industry and sort of watered down, so we get to this like, you know, downcycling kind of thing.
Apart really cleverly, and I know all the plastics, I know all the metals, I know all the circuit boards, and I could then with confidence use it. That would be individual closed loop producer responsibility. There's no benefit for that under the legislation. Does flame retardancy mean anything to you at all? Or?
Yeah. I was wondering if I could actually mine some brominated flame retardants from myself and put them in my toaster. But
oh dear, oh dear.
So there's the toaster after like, you know, 9 months of struggle, and there it is with its wonderful plastic case, and then there it is on the shelves down at John Lewis, and, you know, yeah, and so then kind of this like genuine attempt at like, oh yeah, I just want to like make something completely myself, starts kind of, you know, maybe, you know, getting a bit more of a kind of critical sort of layer to it, and it's like, and then, I don't know, it's, obviously there's like the kind of environmental economics aspect of like, is the kind of true cost to the world kind of captured in the sort of price of the object? You know, if we kind of priced in the pollution, you know, what would the cost of a toaster be? There's also something here about like, well, if we're like wishing, you know, okay, fine, let's price in all the pollution, then we're like wishing for things to be more expensive, but that means that's the equivalent of like wishing for yourself to be poorer, and like it's a difficult thing to wish yourself to be poorer. And there's also this like kind of, you know, how do we make our kind of rich world sustainable? And this is Sao Paulo, and in the upper half of the picture there's like the kind of luxury flats, and in the lower half of the picture there's the kind of much more sustainable sort of dense sort of population, and it's like I sort of this dilemma of like, yeah, I know this is not kind of, I know my lifestyle isn't sustainable, but I like it, and I don't want to be poorer, and so I need to be forced to be poorer. But this kind of like project of like, oh, I just want to make a toaster, and this real project becomes kind of critical and less real somehow. And this is how I presented it way back in my own MA. I thought I'd include this, basically just the pots and pans and then the final object. And I didn't really know sort of what was going to happen to it, but kind of accidentally wrote it into a book, and then that kind of, you know, basically just a really simple book. Yeah, and then it kind of became a book, and then the story kind of took over, this like story of struggle, a real person struggling to do something that they really wanted to do, and that really helped this project travel because people can like connect to that story, and then that helped hopefully with the kind of the critical discussion. So another story. So several years later, various kind of less successful projects after the toaster. Like honestly, I was talking about the toaster a lot, and like things aren't going so well, and feeling a little bit depressed, and I'm like, you know, personal life's not going well, you know, professional life not going that well, kind of worried about the future, you know, been reading some bad stuff about climate change again, and I'm looking after this dog, Noggin, and Noggin's like, just whatever, you know, he's sort of not that bothered. And I just have that thought like, oh, wouldn't it be nice to be you, Noggin? You know, you wouldn't have to sort of worry about any of this shit which I'm having to deal with. And, you know, this is a long discussed sort of philosophical dilemma. You know, is it better to know if you could like live in a happy world, happy box, like oblivious to everything, you know, would you sort of do that? And usually the kind of philosophers always find some way to like say, oh no, it's always better to face up to the world, and you know, like, yeah, it's always better to know, etc., etc. But I don't know, Noggin has quite a kind of a good existence. Yes, he gets kind of upset day to day, or, you know, but he doesn't sort of, I don't know, he takes every day as it comes. He's very connected to his environment. These kinds of things that, like, you know, the wellness industry tell us to kind of do. And so I started thinking, wouldn't it be great to just like gallop away from all of this and just sort of take a holiday from it all? And became a bit of a dream. And I realised it's kind of like a dream I've had since I was a child. Like, and then I kind of wrote this funding application to the Wellcome Trust, and amazingly, they gave me some money to do it. And I told the Wellcome Trust that I wanted to become an elephant. And I thought an elephant would be a good animal to be because, like, they're not a kind of hunter, but they're not really a prey animal. Like, they're kind of fairly impervious, and, like, I don't know, I just thought it'd be, like, easier to kind of be an elephant. And they got a trunk, and I thought that would be fun. And then did some research into elephants once I got the money, and realised that elephants are one of the only other species that, you know, may well have a kind of idea of their own mortality. They have this, like, they mourn the death of, like, a family member, and they live in very kind of complex families, and that was exactly what I was trying to escape from, you know, the complexity of family. And so, yeah, you know, what do? I go to the pub, and I'm like moaning to my friend in the pub, like, oh, I've got all this money to be an elephant, and I don't want to be an elephant anymore, you know, what do I do? And she sent me off to see a friend of hers who is a shaman, a shamanic practitioner. And this lady lives in kind of the outskirts of Copenhagen in a commune. You know, she didn't want me to film her, so I switched anyway. She sits me down, and you know, immediately says I was an idiot for ever thinking I could become an elephant, because, like, you know, what kind of shared history do I have with elephants? You know, I grew up in London. And so she says, look, you could maybe be an animal that's much closer to you kind of historically. So you've got lots of squirrels in London, you could become a squirrel. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to be a squirrel. And then she's like, you could be a sheep. There's sheep in Britain, and somehow a sheep isn't a very cool animal either. But then she said, okay, well, maybe a goat. And as soon as she said goat, I was like, yes, that is exactly the correct animal for me. And she also pointed out that my idea of oh yeah, my new novel idea is probably something that humans have been doing possibly for as long as we've been cognitively modern humans. So this Therian trope, kind of human-animal hybrid, supposedly, was drawn by somebody on the wall of a cave 44,000 years ago in Sulawesi in Indonesia. And, basically, through kind of every culture, there's stories, or, many cultures, there's stories of humans becoming animals or taking on the characteristics of animals. But, I am from London, as I said, and how do I do this project? I go and visit scientific experts to try and understand what they can do to help me become a goat. And so I went to visit Dr. McElliott at Queen Mary University and said, he's a goat behavioural psychologist, and we went to visit his research subjects at Buttercup's Sanctuary for Goats, and I asked him what makes my mind different from a goat's mind, and he said, well, we don't know, and we may never really be able to know, really, but our best guess at the moment is, well, goats and most other animals don't have this kind of human ability to construct these very complex stories in their brains, these kind of scenarios, these what might happen if, what might have happened if, and I'm thinking, okay, yeah, this is stories about the future, your hopes, and this is kind of stories about the past, your regrets, okay, this is exactly what I want to get rid of. And then Dr. McElliott said yes, and then of course, yes, goats vocalise and communicate, but they don't have this compulsion that humans have to tell other people the stories that are in our heads. So I went to a neuroscientist, and this neuroscientist, Dr. Devlin at UCL, uses transcranial magnetic stimulation to induce virtual lesions in his research subjects. So I said, could you induce lesions, virtual lesions in the parts of my brain that let me kind of think in stories and let me kind of, communicate using language? And he said, well, I could, but that would be sort of inducing a lesion in about 2/3 of your brain. And if I did that all at the same time, that would be a massive stroke, and that would not pass the ethics board approval. So he said, what I can maybe do is just sort of target a tiny pathway, part of the pathway involved in your ability to communicate using language, Broca's area, and he kind of switched off my ability to speak, and it was kind of strange and quite uncomfortable. I'll kind of gallop through. So the body, he basically said, what you're asking me to do, selectively adjust your perception of the world and yourself, is far beyond our ability, our understanding of neuroscience at the moment. So I kind of, he said, come back in 50 years. So, I'll shelve that for 50 years. But I moved on to body, and I thought body would be the easy part because we've got all of that anatomy in common. How hard can it be? Just lengthen a bit, shorten a bit. And so I go to the workshop and start making these exoskeletons that are going to let me gallop away, escape. And it's prototype number 3. It's sort of not working. The kind of springiness is not there. And, you've all seen the amazing kind of quadruped robots that kind of can just gallop. And so I tracked down a researcher who works on these, he's an evolutionary anatomist, at the Royal Veterinary College, and I say, look, I've got the kind of amazing neural net already, and the kind of actuators, and the kind of sensor package. Why am I finding this so hard? And he said, look, you've got kind of 1 million years of evolution, like specializing you in kind of becoming a biped, and to become a quadruped, you have to like undo that and then kind of become a quadruped. So it's kind of easier for us to start from scratch with robots. And he takes me on a tour of his work, and I should say now it gets a little bit kind of gory because he does lots of dissection in his work. So if you're particularly squeamish. And he was in the middle of dissecting a snow leopard, and I'm like, wow, that's an endangered species. How many goats have you dissected? And to my surprise, he said, none. And I said, well, could we dissect a goat? And he said, yeah, sure, if you bring me a dead goat. So I started thinking, where could I get a dead goat from? And so I went back to the goat sanctuary and had a kind of quite difficult conversation, because these goats all have names. And, and that's something, But they said, look, there is a goat called Venus, and Venus is dying, and we don't know what. She's got this wasting disease, problem with her guts, you can have her body if you get the vets at the veterinary college to do a biopsy and tell us what she's died from. So Venus died. Unfortunately, she died on a Sunday, so she had to spend the night in my fridge. But then the next day, I took her to the Royal Veterinary College and then kind of took part in this kind of very interesting process, which you don't kind of often see. But it happens to like millions of animals a day. But it was this like very kind of interesting, literally visceral kind of sort of understanding of the difference between a kind of engineered approach and a kind of generative evolutionary approach to kind of creating movement. And I realized that like it was the interface between my kind of engineered exoskeleton and my evolved body that was going to be the difficult thing, and that is exactly what prosthetists, doctors of prosthetics do. So I visited some doctors of prosthetics and said, can you make me some legs, goat front legs? And they said, okay, it'll take us a few weeks. And so in the meantime, I started thinking about guts, and I could eat as much grass as I want, but I can't like digest it. And so I realised I wasn't going to be very free of human concerns if I had to still worry about like money to like buy food. So I needed a rumen, right? This is why goats and other ruminants can like kind of survive on like the kind of foliage that we can't. So this is Venus's rumen, and this brown fluid is the rumen fluid, which is this like, it's a whole extra microbiome that ruminants have, like a whole extra stomach with this bacteria and fungi, which are all specialized in breaking down the kind of stuff that our body sees as fiber. And so I kind of made this bag that I could strap to my torso, and it's like a U-shaped bag, and my plan was like I'd bite off some grass, chew it up, spit it into one end of the bag, and then I would kind of keep it all nice and warm, and then if I could get some of that fluid, rumen fluid, a sample of like healthy bacteria and fungi, and then I could culture it, and then I could suck out that kind of brown milkshake from the other end of the bag, and then it would kind of go down into my true stomach. So I went and explained this idea to some ruminant biologists at the University of Aberystwyth, and I showed them my artificial rumen. They showed me their artificial rumens, and they were like, yeah, that could be an interesting idea, nodding along. And I was like, well, would you be able to like send me a sample of rumen fluid when the time comes? And they were like, yeah, we often like sample, take samples. And then when the time came, they didn't send me the rumen fluid. They sent me a letter from the university lawyers, like strongly kind of cease and desist. They also contacted the Wellcome Trust, went to the funders as well, and like it was a whole, shit show. Anyway, so I had to just go and do it and like try and like live the life of a goat. So I went to Switzerland and had contacted this guy, Sepp, who owns a goat farm in the Alps, and then just, I'm interested in goats. And then when I turned up, I was like, I'm so interested in goats, Sepp, that I would like to become one of your goats. And he was great. He just said, okay, fine, make yourself at home. The goat shed's over there. He said, but I'm going to move the goats tomorrow, Thomas. And I was like, don't worry, Sepp. Just do what you normally do. Don't pay me any attention, I'll just blend in. The next morning, kind of quite early after milking, I found myself like trying to forget I was a human being. And for a while, it was great. It was like, yes, I'm sort of like, everyone was really excited, and it was kind of really cool. But it was really hard going downhill. And I was really slow and really scared, but of course the goats are just amazing. And so it just left me behind. But I mean, what could I do except like plod along, like my prosthetics are giving me blisters, take lots of breaks. And just kind of carry on slowly at my own pace. But then, it took me a whole day, basically, to do what the goats did in just a kind of hour. But then finally I get to their new pasture where they're going to be for the next few days. And so I spent the next kind of 6 days, trying to forget I'm a human being and sort of live as a goat. And it's took me quite a long time to work out what this project was about. And I kind of realised I found it like not just physically hard, but kind of spiritually really difficult. And I realised it was because like becoming a goat was like
the final frontier.
I grew up watching Star Trek, and Star Trek is like basically the vision of the future, and it's really this like narrative of like, from the cave to the stars. This is like the human story, and in like trying to become a goat, I realised I was like, oh, this is just a story, and like goats don't have a story. They don't have like this kind of story that makes them feel part of anything bigger. Like the life of a goat is just like live and die without leaving a mark on the world. And that's like, quite a difficult thing to aspire to, like just to like leave no mark, don't be successful, just kind of live and die, and without being part of anything bigger than yourself. And so I think that's why the Goat Project was hard, and I think that's sort of what it was about, really, like not really about trying to like understand goats. It was that thing of like, oh yeah, I understood myself, more. And like, I've lost track of time, but there's one more story, which is the current story that I'm sort of working on, and I've got 2 children now. And I guess I was living in America, and in America, you drive everywhere, And my daughter used to hate going in the car. She would kick and scream. She could not be put in her car seat. And I kind of start thinking, well, maybe she's got like a point. And I'm also obviously feeling guilty about climate and like the role of design. And like, I'm sort of like, I've been in the design world now for like a while, and so I can kind of remember when like it was kind of green design, and then it's like eco design, and then it's like sustainable design, and then it's like biophilic design, and then it's kind of regenerative design, and it's like all of these kind of like things about design. But I'm just kind of thinking, is that like a rebranding, or like what has design contributed? Like all of these conversations that we've been having, and like let's try and change, make the world a better place through design. But so people, one version of design is it creates value through objects, but maybe we're now in this kind of spaceship Earth world, this zero-sum game, and so is design basically we use objects to like move harm from place to place. So I decided if I can't design something good, maybe I'll just aim for like 0. Can I aim for sort of baseline? Can I aim to be harmless? And so I decided I would like try and design a harmless car. And I was living in a zoo at the time. And spent the next sort of few weeks collaborating with car designers to try and make a car out of the most harmless material I could think of, which was like coppiced willow. Kind of revisiting like the past. Wheels are really difficult and complex. And then I kind of made this car. It was going to be like sail powered. And it's kind of got these big wheels to sort of, so it can like roll over things, spread the weight. And there was no wind, so I just thought, okay, I just need to make this car go along, because like, sort of, So that's a bit of a kind of rush through what is kind of turning into a story, but I don't know if it's a real story. I'm trying to like work out how it's real. But for me, I guess the point of it is, we try and do no harm, but we now understand basically everything is connected, and so it's kind of impossible to be harmless. And so, it's maybe a useful thing to ask who you should harm with your inevitable harm. So that's kind of what I'm mucking around with at the moment. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Would anyone like to ask any questions? Hands up, if so. Do not go once. No? All good? Question, please.
I have one.
Go.
Maybe it's like a little bit like off top, but what's quite fascinating, I think, in your route and to any design student is this sort of determination that drives you. Like, can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Is it just like pure curiosity, or like, because obviously it's not outcome driven because you don't know the outcome. So the outcome is generated in the process. So can I ask about the internal motivation, because it's amazing, but also.
Yeah, I think it is. I think this is what I was trying to allude to. Was it starts off like outcome driven, but then at some point I realise it's just way too hard, and like, to actually do this is like a PhD at least or whatever. Like, and so then at some point, it kind of, there's like a, I don't know, is there like a real like dip when it's like, oh no, I can't do what I set out to do, but I need to do something. And so then it's like, okay, well, what does this actually mean? Can I kind of reframe it, or like, and so, so I think, and sort of in terms of like success and failure, it's like the only projects that, you know, anyone wants to hear about are these ones which like start with this like initial kind of, you know, at least for a few days, I'm like, yeah, I'm really gonna be galloping away. This is gonna be great. Like, it's gonna be a whole new system of like leisure. You know, I can sell it, you know, like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool to have a holiday as a different animal? But like, but then at some point it kind of doesn't work. And so then it's like, okay, well, what does this mean? And usually, you know, and then I kind of find, oh yeah, maybe it's not, you know, not really about that initial kind of thing, but I think the initial sort of genuine outcome-driven hook is really important in terms of like storytelling, because it's like, oh yeah, a real person with a real motivation. And so why I was trying to talk about like real and unreal, and like trying to frame this, you know, I think probably trying to frame this in terms of like real and unreal, is because I think it's a much better form of communication to at least could start with a genuine kind of fairly simple motivation, and then to expand that and use that as a communication tool, rather than be like, okay, I want to communicate something about like the human experience of, you know, like the sort of what it means to be a human being, or I want to communicate something about, you know, like different perceptions of reality, or like the kind of impossibility of ever, and be, you know, so it's, although I do end up communicating about that, it's like somehow setting out to like illustrate that has been less successful for me than setting out to do something and then kind of accidentally kind of illustrating some of those complexities alongside. And so this is, yeah, so, and I, yeah. Do you want a mic? You can just shout at. Yeah.
This feels weird. You were wonderfully reflective throughout the presentation, which I thought was so neat. Always kind of assessing what was working, what wasn't working, what you had to do differently, what you might do next. I guess a lot has changed since you've done these projects in the world, in technology, in your personal life, and kids. How's it been to talk about these projects so many times over so many years? Has that made you think differently about the world, about your practice, about the projects, about yourself?
Yeah, good question. In a way, it's like, there's like a certain pleasure in just kind of telling a story, you know, that's nice. In terms of like, and also, I think there's been like some revisions along the way and like reframing, which is kind of another nice thing about these, you know, like kind of the form somehow of these projects, and that, it's difficult, like the sort of overview. Just personally, it's like I feel, you know, what news did I read kind of depends, sort of depends on how kind of like upset about the world I'm feeling or whatever, and so it does kind of slightly colour things. I think, it's difficult to get an overview. Have they kind of changed in the telling? I suppose, the Toaster Project is really, it's like 15 years old probably, and like, back then it was sort of like, what was the conversation about like sustainability? I had a little bit more hope in it for me, and there was maybe this like, oh yeah, kind of green, well, maybe like eco-consumerism will kind of do something or whatever, and like carbon credits, or, there were these things which haven't proven to be as effective as people hoped. So, yes. But I think that's kind of fine. I still, it's also nice that I still get emails from people like teenagers, discovered the project or whatever and really liked it. So, so I don't know. I'm not quite sure where I'm going, but there's definitely been a bit of reframing. As I said, it took me quite a long time to work out what the GOAT project was about. So it was in terms of the story arc and being asked kind of that journalistic question, so what did you learn from the goats or whatever? And it's difficult to give an answer because the story should be, oh yes, and then I discovered something deep and meaningful from living amongst the goats. There should be something there, but really it wasn't that. And the answer to what did I discover was oh, it's really good being a human being, and beds are nice, coffee's nice, no, I didn't forget myself. No, I didn't have any epiphany. So sometimes I do tell that story. But yeah. Yeah. Oh, sorry, no, I was pointing, yeah.
It's sort of related to the first question, but I was thinking about all these projects and just sort of, it seems like there's a moment in each of these, sort of, as you get to the brainstorm, that you sort of decide on the guiding question that you're going to sort of follow. And I'm curious kind of what your relationship is to the generating of those questions, and as you're sort of starting to think about each of these ideas and starting to, maybe you have 10 questions that you're sort of writing out, what your relationship is to getting to the one that kind of guides the project and the process.
I think it's slightly okay, just do the thing, I just want to gallop, I just want to make a toaster. The car, which is sort of a similar form, is a bit annoying because I think it was just I just want to be harmless, I'm sick of feeling guilty, and so, so the sort of the impetus is a very simple thing, and then, overlaying a kind of guiding question that kind of comes a bit later, and so I think it's kind of as simple as that. I think the impetus is just a kind of, oh yeah, that'd be cool. Let's do that. And those are the projects which I like the most. And so the other projects where I'm okay, this is my question and this is how I'm, the kind of slightly more step by step sort of, rational approach. It doesn't sort of necessarily have that kind of that at least that like initial spark, and so yeah, and so even though I find them interesting, you know, they're much less interesting to kind of talk about. Yeah, so which is again going back to this sort of reality, unreality. Like there is a certain amount of reality to like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool to like gallop? You know, we can, and then, you know, I don't know if it's like sort of post-rationalizing. You know, I'm very happy to post-rationalize and like reframe and like add, you know, kind of recontextualize or add a kind of add something onto that kind of, because it's there in the kind of the initial idea, but it's just kind of, I guess, like drawing stuff out, and also being a little bit guided by the kind of how the project pans out a bit as well. Yeah, kind of also kind of guides the question. So yeah, so it's kind of like the question kind of, or the, yeah, comes a bit later, which, yeah, I think is how my brain thinks anyway. Yeah.
So what makes a really strong design vision in your view?
Yeah, I think sort of actually, you know, first like actually trying to do it because, you know, I have thought about like, oh, the GOAT project could be like a kind of design fiction with like kind of, you know, whatever, but like, or the car, you know, all of these are like thought experiments basically, which could, you know, you can imagine a different project and it would be like a kind of thought experiment or a design fiction. But there's something nice about trying to do it because you're confronted with like the completely unseeable complexity of like the physical world, and like, you know, anyone who's tried to make anything like, or, you know, try to do some DIY or whatever. I'm doing a lot of DIY at the moment. It's always way more complex, way harder. Like there's always, you know, something that you couldn't possibly foresee. And so, yeah, so I think almost remaining in a kind of design fiction world is too easy. And I like to kind of personally like, you know, get to that kind of, that cold face, get to that kind of, go and talk to somebody, you know, and like fail at doing it, and, you know, because all of these projects are failures, but yeah, you're forced to confront reality, which is good. So yeah, so there's that, like actually trying to do it, even if it's a fiction. And yeah, that's my answer. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you allowed to elaborate how you got the Welcome Trust to fund your original elephant project?
Yeah, happy to elaborate. I think they gave me £30,000 to become an elephant, which seems like a lot in some ways, but then in other ways it's not. Strangely, after sort of, you know, I don't know if it's connected, I hope not, but after this GOAT project, they kind of wound down the scheme that that I'd like applied for, kind of big restructuring. Now the Wellcome Trust doesn't fund like individual people, you have to be a big kind of organisation, like, so yeah, but it was just a kind of art science scheme. And so it was almost like a public understanding of science was like the pitch I was going for. And it is a little bit, because it's quite nice to, you know, go and visit
people studying goat psychology or neuroscience or like ruminant biology, and, you know, and so that was kind of part of like going to these kind of offices and labs which, you know, don't normally, you know, the output is normally a kind of journal and like sort of asking these questions, yeah, and kind of having these conversations. So that was the kind of it was like the arts, the public understanding of science was the kind of, that was the scheme. Yeah, but yeah.
Did you have to update them throughout? Like how?
They were kind of delightfully hands off. Like, I don't know if you know about the Wellcome Trust. I think they're like maybe like the second by sort of amount of money. I think they're the second biggest sort of foundation in the world. They've got a lot of money. So there wasn't really much kind of updating, but where I did, you know, I mentioned like run into trouble was this this kind of ruminant biology thing, and like this sort of experimenting on myself, and in this kind of slightly slapdash sort of way, and woke up to, because the Aberystwyth people had got in touch. They became quite worried that I would possibly contract like some, because I got hold of some different enzymes and was going to use them instead of the ruminant fluid, but then I kind of mentioned this to them and they like couldn't get in touch with me, so because they got quite worried about my health, and so they got in touch with the Wellcome Trust, and then the Wellcome Trust were like, well, come in, we might have to like withdraw funding, and like they were talking about you becoming a goat, but we're funding you to become an elephant, because at some point, I hadn't really updated them about like the direction the project had taken. So then I was like, had this funny meeting, which was like me trying to convince the Wellcome Trust, firstly, not to like pull funding and like I would be safe from now on, but secondly, that in terms of like the project, the goals of the project remained intact, despite the fact that I was no longer trying to become an elephant, but I was trying to become a goat. You know, it was sort of like, I don't know, it was a weird, like, yeah, it's fine, like, goats, anyway. So it's sort of just that, like, a mild bit of friction with the funding people, but yeah, I don't know. I think they liked the project, but I also think they got quite a lot of flack because it got picked up by the Daily Mail, and then the Daily Mail journalist like also put in their article like government-funded researcher tries to become a goat. Of course, that was their angle, and so then I had to like write to the Daily Mail. And you don't want to read the comments below a Daily Mail article, but like. So it was sort of like, and you can obviously see like why that would be a problem, and like, you know, yeah. So this project like does bubble up, and it is sort of, I think it was like kind of somebody in Brazil said that the Bolsonaro had like tweeted about it in Brazil as like an example of like sort of like the, you know, now people are trying to become goats, you know, whatever next, you know. And so, yeah, just being taken completely out of context, and sort of the, like, hopefully more meaningful reading of the project is kind of completely lost. But that's, I guess, in a way it's fine, because it is funny and absurd. Yeah, but it's also just, that's what happens. Oh, there's one. No, no, sorry, I thought you were. Yeah, but no one's interested in those ones. Like, you know, I've done like, oh yeah, you know, do this all this like metaphorical like symbol, like, you know, basically make a kind of sculpture, like a bad sculpture, and yeah, I kind of rush through those ones. Or so yeah, definitely. And it's kind of my slight problem with the car is like it's a little bit worked out before the project has sort of begun. So I'm trying to like work out what to do with it, if you see what I mean. It's a bit of a problem in general. Like you have the idea, you think much more quickly ahead of like what you can actually do, and so it's almost like by the time you do it, you're bored of the project already, which is a problem. But then it comes down to that, like, well, I've got to do something at the exhibition. You know, that fear of kind of embarrassment, and that's you just have to finish it, and even though you're bored of it, and just like slog away.
Connected to that, then, how long did each of the projects take?
So I guess like the goat was over a few years, like because I was doing other things in between and then returning to it, but like then editing it into a story as I've told it and stuff like that. So and like the car, like I started a couple of years ago. It's currently like sort of being colonised in a park in Amsterdam I went back and there's like a bird's nest in it, like, so it's kind of, I don't know where the car, if it will go anywhere, so that sort of thing, like returning to stuff and, and then like editing it into a story, reframing it is what happens, but yeah, it can take quite a long time.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Thomas. Good. 7:30. Yeah, sure.
I was thinking, actually